Genesis chapter 29. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern people. There he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. "And here comes his daughter Rachel with his sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his son's sister, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, my time is completed, and I want to make love to her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. Here we see Jacob, the younger son of Isaac and Rebekah. He goes to his relative Laban's house. Laban is a relative of Rebekah, his mother. And Rebekah herself was a relative of Abraham through a grandparent. And so here you see Jacob coming to his uncle, working there, and he falls in love with Rachel. But instead of his uncle keeping his promise, his uncle gives him the older daughter in her place. So then Jacob, still in love with Rachel, works an additional 7 years. Now there's a lot of complex issues in this passage. A lot of complex issues. First, this idea of a woman as property, a woman as a reward for labor. Second, the idea of the father interchanging his daughters, saying that he was going to marry the younger daughter to Jacob, but instead giving the older daughter. Because it seems that Jacob knew Rachel, had spoken to her, that he was in love with her. The hope would be that she was in love with him also, as well as Leah. And when we read about later in their life, it seems that they do love their husband to some extent, that they do seek to be happy with him, that they do seek to make the best of this strange situation. In addition to this, we have the issue of polygamy. Jacob taking 2 wives. Abraham had only 1 wife. Then he had a concubine. Then, after his wife died, he married again. Isaac had only 1 wife, Rebekah. But Jacob here has 2 wives. If we go back in time and we look at Noah, Noah had 1 wife. If we look at Adam, Adam had 1 wife. And so here you see this change. You see something that is not ideal. You see something that is strange, maybe even something that is sinful. And yet out of this relationship, God calls forth the 12 tribes of Israel. For Jacob will have 12 sons. That these sons, some will be of Rachel, some will be of Leah. And yet God uses these people who come from a strange arrangement, who come from a lie, as it were, a deception on the part of Laban. And yet here we see that God can bring good out of evil. That no matter the circumstance of the birth of the child, the conception of the child, that God has brought good because the child is good. And that God loves that child, even if one or both of the parents do not. So we have this interesting situation, this complex situation, where Jacob, who is the inheritor of the covenant of God and Isaac, who is the inheritor of the covenant between God and Abraham, becomes himself a member of a covenant. If we remember, 2 days ago we read about Bethel, the house of God. And here we see Jacob and his family, though it is a family that is strange to our modern understandings. Yet we see this family, and God is able to use that family. When Christ comes, he says, from the beginning it was not so, for God created them, Adam and Eve, that a man should leave his parents and cling to his wife. So we see that Jesus will, who is a descendant of one of these relationships, a descendant of Judah, that he will bring right. He will bring order. He will correct what mistakes have been made, and he will bring good out of what appeared to be evil.